Section 4 of the Golden Porch. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Golden Porch by W. M. L. Hutchinson. The Favourite of the Gods. Chapter 2. A year had almost passed since the wonderful night when the gods feasted in the house of Tantalus. The story of that banquet was carried far and wide, and strangers came from many lands to see with their own eyes the king who would entertain Zeus himself, and hear from his own lips how the immortals had looked, and what they had said to him. Tantalus was never tired of boasting about it all, and if he was proud before, you may fancy that now he was 10 times prouder and more vainglorious, as he had repeated the marvellous tale to guests at his feasts, surrounded by so much splendour, and seated on the throne where, as he told them, the king of the gods had sat in all his majesty. He began to feel that he himself was a sort of Zeus upon earth, and to imitate all he could remember of the god's appearance and behaviour. "Thus spoke Zeus," he would say, holding out his own sceptre, and doing his best to copy the voice of the heavenly king when he told the story. And at last, as it seemed to him that he acted the part of a god exceedingly well, he did it not only when he described the visit of the immortals, but every day and all day long. But he forgot how gracious and how gentle those immortals had shown themselves, and only tried to copy their calm, grand looks and gestures. So, while he still gave splendid feasts to all who came, and sent them away with costly gifts, he now received his guests coldly and haughtily, as if they were hardly worthy to come into his presence. Travellers, when they got home again, talked even more about the king's pride and his boastful speeches than about his golden house and his marvellous riches. As for his own subjects, they never saw him now, except driving through the city in a glittering chariot drawn by 4 white horses, while troops of slaves ran before him, scattering gold among the crowd, and crying, "Make way there for the great king! Bow down before him, all ye people, and do him reverence, for he is the friend of the gods, and his glory is more than mortal." Tantalus no longer sat in his judgment seat of the kings of Lydia to do justice among his people, and if any man were bold enough to go up to the golden palace, either the guards would drive him away, saying that the king did not choose to be troubled by common folk, or they would push him roughly into the presence chamber, where Tantalus sat enthroned, stiff and silent, like an idol, in gorgeous array. And the stern, cold face of the king would so terrify the poor man that he would not dare to plead for the boon he came seeking. So the year went by, but before it ended, rumours came to Tantalus from foreign lands that the tales of the travellers about his famous banquet were disbelieved by many who heard them. People were saying everywhere that he had not really feasted the gods at all. He had merely built a most wonderful palace, and then, because his guests were always telling him that his house and his banquets were fit for the gods, his head was turned with those flatteries till he suffered a strange delusion, and thought he had given a feast to Zeus himself. Some of the travellers now asked him to show them some token of the immortals' visit, which he was unable to do, and this made him very angry. How he wished he had thought of asking Zeus to leave some sign of his presence which no one could doubt! It was no use, of course, to point to his courtiers and his slaves, and say, "All these saw the gods as plainly as I did," for everyone knew what to expect of slaves and courtiers. If the king, their master, chose to say he had seen the gods, they would not dare to contradict him. Nay, if he said he saw them with 2 heads apiece, or no heads at all, they would swear they saw the same. These thoughts were very unpleasant to Tantalus, and so occupied his mind that he forgot the time was at hand when he, in turn, was to feast with Zeus. Indeed, although at first he had boasted freely about going as a guest to the heavenly halls, he had never felt quite sure that he would ever get there, and as time wore on, he came to think of his seeing the gods face to face as a wonderful thing that could never happen again. If only he could convince those impudent travellers that it ever had happened! Now it befell, on the very day 12th from the coming of the gods, that ambassadors arrived, with gifts from the king of a far country, who desired to know the truth of the report he had heard, that the king of Lydia had given a feast to the immortals. Tantalus received them hospitably, and when evening came, they sat with him at the banquet, and he told them the whole story. Perhaps some doubts about that story had been whispered to them on their journey, for as the king told the tale, he noted with displeasure that the newcomers looked one at another, smiling sillily. "Strangers," he cried haughtily, "do you dare to mock me, or do you doubt that my tale is true?" "Great king," answered the eldest ambassador, "we are simple men, and we fear that you are pleased to make sport of us, asking us to take your royal dreams for truth. But if this be not so, Are you sure that Zeus left you with some token of his presence at your feast, to be a witness to all men of the honour done you? We humbly desire to see that token, that we may carry word of it to our master, who will then believe the wondrous report he has heard." Tantalus was nearly beside himself with rage at this request, which he felt quite certain had been suggested to the ambassadors by some of those evil-minded persons who had asked him the very same thing before, and gone away scoffing. But it came into his mind that he would only make matters worse if he sent these grave ambassadors away with an angry answer. They would spread the story still farther, of his having no proof at all to show, and very soon, unless he could somehow put a stop to what people said about him, he, Tantalus, would become the laughing-stock of the world. Then quickly he resolved to gain a little time by hiding his rage and speaking pleasant words. "I see," he said, "that the king, your master, has wise and prudent servants. You are very right to desire some proof of so great a marvel, and you shall have it, but it is already late, and you are wearied with your journey. Go now to rest, and tomorrow I will show you what you wish." The ambassadors bowed deeply, and were led to the splendid chambers prepared for them. Tantalus remained sitting in the jewelled hall, thinking very hard what he was to do. Tomorrow he meant to put the ambassadors off again with some further excuse, and to persuade them to stay with him some days longer. But how could he find them a proof, however long they stayed? "I would be alone," he said to the slaves who waited his commands, and they all withdrew. It was very quiet now in the great empty room. The king thought and thought, till nearly midnight, but could find no way out of his difficulty. Anyone else would have called upon the gods to help him, but Tantalus was so used to thinking himself all-powerful that this never entered his head. At last, quite tired out with puzzling over the question, he leaned back on his throne and fell asleep. How long he slept he never knew. It seemed only a few minutes had passed when he was awakened by sounds of music, talking, and laughter. He sat up and rubbed his eyes in astonishment. There, all round him, sat the gods, just as he had seen them a year ago that very night. For one moment he thought they had come back to show themselves to those unbelieving ambassadors and cover them with shame. But then he saw that he was no longer sitting in his own palace hall. The place he had awoke in seemed like a vast temple, with walls and ceiling of some wonderful stone that shone like pure gold, and yet was transparent like glass. All round this hall were rows of tall pillars, and every pillar was a single block of ruby, sapphire, or emerald, glowing with its own coloured fire. There were no windows, and no lamps either in the room, which was flooded with what Tantalus would have thought was sunshine, only he supposed it was still night. Then he knew that this was no earthly palace, but the dwelling of Zeus, and suddenly he remembered the promise of the god. This was the night he was to feast with the immortals, and here he was! He wondered if the little Pelops had been carried to the sky palace too, and soon saw the child nodding and smiling at him from the couch where he sat, as he had done before, between Poseidon and the Queen of Love. All the immortals now welcomed Tantalus with friendly looks and words of greeting, and one who seemed the youngest of the goddesses presented him with a shining cup, into which he poured wine the colour of dark mountain honey. "Fill our cups to the brim, Hebe, my daughter," said Zeus to the beautiful cup-bearer, "and drink, every one of you, to this friend of ours, who played the host to us so well. To our host, King Tantalus! To our host, King Tantalus!" cried the golden-haired Apollo, and the rest, as they drank, repeated, "To King Tantalus!" and then all together cried, "Hail, mortal! Hail, guest of Zeus! Hail, friend of the gods!" Now Tantalus no sooner tasted the drink of the gods, which men call nectar, than he was filled with such mirth and gladness as he had ever known, nor any mortal can know, save those few who are permitted to share the banquet of Zeus. For nectar is brewed with honey from celestial flowers, and with the juice of apples that grow in the enchanted isles of the sunset, and they who drink it have perpetual youth and joy. So the king forgot in a moment the troubles he had left behind on earth, and gave himself up to the delights of the heavenly feast. He thought he could look for ever at this glorious house of Zeus, compared to which his golden palace seemed but a mere hovel. Here topaz and emerald, and all stones known on earth as precious, because they are found only in small pieces, were to be seen in blocks as big as the masses of marble on his own hillsides. Therefore the gods wore no jewels, such as earthly kings are adorned with, and as for silver and gold, though their houses and furniture seemed to be made of those metals, they were not the same silver and gold that there is in this world of ours, but so much purer and finer that the light shone through them. So the hall where the immortals were feasting looked like a temple built out of moonbeams and sunbeams and rainbows, and its sapphire pavement like a piece of the sky, which is just what it was. The tables in this hall were covered with every sort of delicious fruit that grows in all the countries of the world. From the garden of Zeus they were all ripe the whole year round. There were peaches and grapes, oranges and pomegranates and strawberries, and many more sorts that Tantalus had never seen before. The king noticed that none of the immortals took any of these fruits from the baskets of myrtle twigs in which they were piled, and that clouds of great butterflies were hovering over the tables. Now the plates of his neighbours always seemed full, but his remained empty, and as no one offered him anything, he began to think the gods were strangely neglecting their guest. "You do not understand our customs, friend Tantalus," said the merry voice of Hermes in his ear. "We offer you nothing, because you've only to wish, and your plate will be as full as mine." The king looked at a superb bunch of grapes which he saw in front of him, but just as he wished for it, it disappeared. At the same instant a very large purple butterfly settled on his plate. He put out his hand to touch it, and it was gone, but in its place there lay the bunch of grapes. Then he wished for an orange, and the same thing happened, only this time the butterfly's wings were golden red. "I do not understand these butterflies," he said to Hermes. "They are your wishes," said the young god, "and if you look, you'll see the wishes of my companions bringing them whatever they may fancy in the same way." "This is a strange magic," said the king, who now felt quite at ease with the friendly Hermes. "But now I see a number of golden bees flying about the tables, which I think must be wishes too, for wherever one alights it vanishes, and a round cake the colour of honey appears in its place. Tell me, Hermes, if these fruits and those small cakes are all your food, for though nothing can be more delicious than your fruit, I should not care, for my part, to live on figs and grapes and honey bread." Hermes, at these words, could not answer for laughing, but Athena, the grey-eyed goddess who sat on the king's other side, turned her grey face to him, and said, "You know not what you say, O Tantalus. That honey bread, as you call it, is the bread of immortality, which in the speech of men is called ambrosia, and those who eat of it live for ever. Rich and great you may be, King of Lydia, but wise you are not, or you would know better than to ask if we immortals have such food as pleases your gross mortal appetite. An ox roasted whole, perhaps, is what you hope for at my father's table." Tantalus knew that Athena was the wisest of all the gods, except her father Zeus, and he was ashamed that she had overheard his thoughtless words. "Lady and Queen," he answered, "forgive what I have spoken in my ignorance. How could I know that the bread was the divine ambrosia, of which men tell but know not what it is like?" "Come, sister," then said Hermes, still laughing, "do not be offended with our guest. Remember, we do not all despise the food of mortals, and Zeus himself has eaten porridge in a peasant's hut. Yes, Tantalus, once I travelled on earth with Zeus, in the disguise of wandering pedlars, that we might see who would show kindness to the poor and homeless, and when we had been turned away from many a rich man's door, we found shelter with two poor old cottagers, who gladly shared their humble supper with us out of charity. Those worthy old souls, Philemon and his wife Baucis, were terrified when we showed ourselves in our true shape next morning, but they soon had their reward, for Zeus promised to grant whatever they should ask." "Then I suppose they asked to be made king and queen of that country," said Tantalus, "though I cannot say I ever heard of a king Philemon or a queen Baucis." "No," replied Hermes, "the only thing they wanted was never to be parted, or to leave the cottage where they had been so happy together. Zeus promised that they never should, and when they had ended their lives in peace at the same moment, they were changed into two oak trees, which are still flourishing where their cottage stood." Tantalus thought to himself, "What a stupid old couple! If I had been in their place I should have asked Zeus for something very different." But aloud he only said, "That is a very pretty story," not wishing to risk another reproof from the severe Athena. She, however, seemed ready to make him amends for speaking so sternly, and, breaking a cake of ambrosia in her snowy hands, she gave him half of it with a gracious look. "You also, King," she said, "have earned a reward for your hospitality, and this is it. Unlike Philemon and Baucis, you already have everything that a man can wish for on earth, therefore Zeus wills to give you the one gift you have not, the gift of immortality." Tantalus took the piece of ambrosia, and wondered to feel how light it was. He tasted it, and it was like nothing he had ever tasted before, as it melted in his mouth like snow. Never had food seemed to him so delicious, yet he could not tell if it was sweet or sour or salt, because these were the names of earthly flavours, and the flavour of ambrosia is different from any of them. Now he saw that Poseidon and Aphrodite gave the child Pelops fruit to eat and nectar to drink, but they did not give him ambrosia, and he wished that Pelops also should eat this bread of immortality. "Will not the gods give ambrosia to my son?" he asked Athena, rather timidly, "that he too may live for ever?" But the wise goddess shook her head. "We may not give it to a child," she said, "and I will tell you the reason. When we have once given a gift, we have no power to take it back again. So it would be cruel to give the gift of immortality to any who is not old enough to choose whether he will live forever or die, like other men, when his time comes." "Surely," said the king, "there is no one who would not choose to live forever." "Ah, Tantalus," said Athena, and a strange look of pity came into her grey eyes. "You think so now, because you have never known pain or sorrow. But how would it be if your life were full of misery instead of happiness? Think what it would mean to you then, to know you could not die. Beware, moreover, that you presume not to give our gift to others, for that were deadly sin." These words, which he was to remember when too late, gave the king a vague feeling of dread, as if some unknown evil was about to befall him, and he was glad that Hebe at this moment filled his cup with nectar, and Apollo took his lyre and sang a joyous song. When this was ended, Zeus called him to his side and said, "Now, Tantalus, I, who was your guest, have given you feast for feast, and since you gave me your best, I have granted you the highest reward a mortal can have. Henceforth you need not fear death, and so long as you deserve to be the friend of the gods, you shall drink with us the sacred nectar which continually renews our youth and gladness." "And yet, O king of us all," said Hera, with her scornful smile, "I think that this our guest desires a certain gift so much that he would prefer it to nectar and ambrosia." "Let him name it, lady of my heart," answered Zeus, "but we will not have him depart with any desire unsatisfied." "I can name it," Hera said, tossing her queenly head. "It is fame, and were I immortal I would seek it through the world, as all those heroes do who are my favourites among men." "That I can well believe," replied Zeus gravely. "But now let our friend speak for himself. How say you, Tantalus? Have you not fame enough already, being known for the richest and most hospitable king in all the world?" Now the words of Hera had reminded Tantalus that his fame among men was in danger from the evil speaking of the people who would not believe he had feasted the gods. "Great Zeus," he said, "I cannot thank you enough for the wonderful reward you have given me this night, but since you bid me, I will dare to confess that there is one thing wanting to make me entirely happy." Then he told how the great honour the gods had done him by coming to his banquet was not believed by any one, and how that very night the ambassadors from a far country had asked for a proof of the story, and he prayed Zeus to grant him some token which these men might see and believe. He heard the god answer, "When you awake, O Tantalus, you shall find such a token beside you." And then a rosy mist began to float before his eyes. He could just see that Hermes stood beside him, slowly waving his wand. Then his eyes closed, and he knew no more. End of section 4, read by Inkel.